The CDM blueprint, from Cruyff to Alonso, how defensive midfielders re-architected modern football. While 99% of people are watching the ball, they are missing the entire game underneath the game. The most important tactical revolution in football history was not built by a striker, and it was not built by a coach standing on the touchline. It was built from the center circle, by the players everyone was trained to overlook. Watch any match today, and your eye follows the ball. That is the blind spot. The single pivot midfielder is quietly solving a geometry problem, reshaping the pitch into passing triangles before the ball has even arrived. It is invisible on broadcast television, because here is what we are going to prove. 3 men, separated by 4 decades, speaking the exact same tactical language. One built the grammar, one weaponized it, and one is currently rewriting it entirely, teaching an entire backline to think like a single position.
That's the Nexilyze story worth watching. Rewind. To understand where this is going, we need to understand where it started. Not in Munich, not in Manchester, in Amsterdam, in the 1970s, with a Dutchman who treated the football pitch like a chessboard. Football before Johan Cruyff's Barcelona was, structurally, a series of individual duels stitched loosely together. The number 4, the deep-lying midfielder, existed primarily as an insurance policy. Win the ball, give it to someone more creative, repeat. That was the job description. Chaotic transitions, vertical hoofs, positional anarchy. Watch archival footage from the era and the pattern is unmistakable. Players cluster around the ball like iron filings around a magnet, abandoning zones, trusting instinct over structure. Cruyff inherited that chaos at Barcelona and rejected it outright. His innovation was not a formation. 3-4-3 is just numbers on a page. His innovation was a redefinition of function. He took the pivot, historically the least glamorous role on the pitch, and made it the operational brain of the entire team. Here is the if-then chain that changes everything. If the pivot receives the ball facing his own goal under pressure, then the traditional response is a hurried layoff. A panic pass that resets nothing. Cruyff's diamond solved this before the pressure ever arrived. If the double pivot occupies staggered vertical lines, one slightly withdrawn, one slightly advanced, then the receiving player always has an outball at an angle, not just backward. The diamond shape wasn't decoration. It was a pressure release valve built into the geometry itself. If this sounds like a geometry class, that's because for Cruyff, it was. But here is the exact moment that theory turned into a weapon. The uncomfortable truth is this. Cruyff didn't teach Barcelona to pass better. He taught them to occupy space on purpose. Every other team was reacting to where the ball went. Cruyff's Barcelona decided where the ball was going to go, because the space had already been designed to receive it. That is the origin point of everything we are about to discuss. The moment the pivot stopped being a destination for the ball and became its architect. But while Pep perfected the system, Xabi Alonso did something even Guardiola couldn't do. And it all comes down to one specific tactical trigger we'll look at in a moment. Pep Guardiola did not inherit Cruyff's blueprint and simply reproduce it. He inherited the grammar and wrote a new sentence. Guardiola's addition, the concept now known across the analytical community as rest defense, asked a question Cruyff's generation had never fully answered. What happens the instant possession is lost? Rest defense is the structural insurance policy built before the turnover happens, not after. It is the pre-positioning of players, most critically the single pivot, so that when the ball is lost, the team is already shaped to counterpress or delay, rather than scrambling backward in panic. In other words, it's like having your seatbelt buckled before you see the car crash, not after. This is where Sergio Busquets becomes the case study, and this is where fans consistently misread what they are watching. If you evaluate a defensive midfielder purely on tackles and interceptions, then Busquets looks unremarkable, pedestrian even. That is the trap. If, instead, you evaluate him on positional prevention, the passing lanes he closes simply by standing in them, then a different player emerges entirely. Vicente del Bosque, the man who managed Busquets on the biggest stage in the sport, put it more precisely than any analyst could. You watch the game, you don't see Busquets. You watch Busquets, you see the whole game.
That single line is the blind spot, stated outright. The entire premise of this breakdown, confirmed by the coach who had the best seat in the house. If Busquets receives the ball between the opposition's 2 banks of 4, then he has already calculated, before the pass arrives, which defender is being pulled out of position by his presence. If that defender steps, then a teammate has already rotated into the vacated zone. The tackle never needs to happen, because the danger was neutralized 3 seconds earlier through body position and spatial occupation rather than physical duels. This is Guardiola's real innovation, and it is uncomfortable precisely because it is invisible. He converted defending from an act of recovery into an act of prevention. The best defensive midfielder in Guardiola's system is not the one who wins the ball back most often. It's the one who makes the opposition's attack statistically less likely to reach a dangerous zone in the first place. Cruyff built the brain. Guardiola built the immune system around it. There's a second layer to this that broadcast analysis rarely isolates. Rest defense is not simply about the pivot's individual positioning. It is about the geometric relationship between the pivot and the 2 center backs immediately behind him. Think of it less like a formation on a whiteboard and more like 3 security guards covering a doorway. If the one in the middle stands dead center, a decent thief can still slip past on either edge. Offset him 5 yards to one side, and suddenly both edges are covered by 2 sets of eyes instead of 1. Watch closely, and you will notice Busquets rarely sits directly between the 2 center backs. He offsets, by design, 5 or 6 yards to one side, creating what analysts call a passing triangle in reverse, a shape that exists not to receive the ball forward, but to absorb a counterattack backward. If the opposition wins possession in that split second of transition, then the ball carrier is met not by a single covering body, but by a preformed triangle of 3 players, each one already aware of the other two's positioning. This is the detail that separates Guardiola's version of the system from every imitation that followed. Plenty of coaches copied the double pivot. Remember that trigger I mentioned earlier? This is it.
Xabi Alonso at Bayer Leverkusen and Michael Carrick during his time at Middlesbrough did not simply refine the single pivot. They asked a more radical question. What if the entire team could rotate through pivot responsibilities, rather than relying on one player to carry the structural load? The result is what analysts now call the box midfield. 4 players, not 2, occupying a rough quadrilateral in central areas, constantly interchanging who plays deep and who steps forward. And the mechanism that makes this possible is the inverted fullback, a wide defender who, in possession, steps inside to become an auxiliary pivot rather than overlapping down the touchline. This is where the tactical language becomes genuinely subversive.
If a traditional fullback pushes high and wide, then the opposition's winger has a clear, uncontested route to counterattack into the vacated channel. That is the structural weakness every possession-heavy team has historically had to accept as a cost of doing business. If, instead, the fullback inverts into midfield, then 2 things happen simultaneously. First, the team gains a spare central body, effectively a second or third pivot, which means the passing structure Cruyff first sketched in the 70s is no longer dependent on 1 or 2 specialists. Second, and this is the part regular broadcast coverage almost never shows you, the central defenders are now covering the width themselves, spreading to fill the space the fullback vacated. The entire backline has been retrained to think positionally, the way a single pivot used to think alone. If the opposition presses the inverted fullback in that half space, then, because the box midfield has already created numerical superiority centrally, there is always a rotating outlet nearby. The pressure that used to isolate one deep-lying playmaker now dissolves into a structure with no single point of failure.
If this breakdown reshaped how you'll watch the number 6 on Saturday, the player everyone's eye slides past, that is precisely the analytical lens this channel exists to build. Subscribe, because the next deep dive dismantles how inverted fullbacks are quietly killing the traditional winger, and you will not want to miss the structural proof. That's the Nexilyze story worth watching.